Good day. I'm Laurence Sanford, Senior Analyst with the American Security Council Foundation. Our mission is to educate and engage Americans on issues of national security, economic security, and moral leadership. We also have a program called American History Live, which is involved in teaching our youth the glories of American history and what it is to be an American. Our motto is peace through strength. And I'm delighted to have with me today Joy Bartlett, who's the Director of Operations for the American Security Council Foundation. And we're going to talk about China and its Trojan horse approach to subverting America and the Western civilization. Joy?
Thank you, Larry. Thanks for having me back here on the SOS Briefs. And today we are going to talk about his paper called China and Trojan Horses. And I'm going to take a quote out of your paper, Larry, where you said meaning the Chinese party, CCP, their covert purpose is to manipulate, indoctrinate, and influence foreign audiences into following CCP policies. And I'd like to play and share with our audience a little clip. This is Representative Waltz speaking with Laura Ingram.
Well, Laura, Chinese-backed private equity are buying up boarding schools, private schools, and secondary education all over Florida, New York, California, from what we can tell, and many of them have junior ROTC programs. So this is a double win for the Chinese Communist Party. One, they're now putting Confucius Institutes basically into our elementary schools and high schools, and having propaganda platforms to the next generation of America, including our military leaders going through the ROTC program, and they get to send their elites there, at probably a reduced cost.
So, Larry, if you can give us a little brief on your paper, because you did talk a lot about Confucius Institutes and other educational programs they have.
The Confucius Institute was founded many years ago by the Chinese, and since then they've spent hundreds of millions of dollars installing these institutes all over the world. And basically, they're learning centers, usually within another educational establishment, such as a university. But they fund the Confucius Institute, they being the Chinese Communist Party, fund the institute within that university to propagate Chinese values. So they can tell you the glorious history of China, and it's a wonderful civilization, but you cannot bring up such things as the subjugation of Tibet, what happened in Hong Kong at Tiananmen Square. Those are all no-goes as far as bringing subjects up in the so-called education of the Confucius Institutes. And the Chinese Communist Party, they determine who teaches at the institutes. And the number one criteria for the CCP, the Communist Party, is loyalty to the CCP. So those people that they send overseas might not be the greatest educated or the most knowledgeable in the world, but they all have one characteristic. They're very loyal to the CCP. And so at one time, there were over 160 universities in America that had Confucius Institutes. But public awareness, Defense Department initiatives saying, we're not going to fund American universities if they have Confucius Institutes because they're a security threat. They intimidate the faculty, they intimidate students. If you try to have a Dalai Lama appear in your campus, the Chinese students create an uproar and generate all sorts of hate towards anything that goes against the CCP. So with that, the 160 universities is now down around to under 20 universities. But as we just saw in that clip, they've pivoted. You have to take your hat off to the Chinese. They lose one way, they go another way. And so now they're going after the secondary schools, the high schools, and they're buying up land. We've discussed that before, is where they're buying up land and access to military bases, and now they're going after schools. I live in the Melbourne, Florida area, and they bought up a high school down here with a junior ROTC program. In Melbourne is on the Space Coast, and the Space Coast, of course, is Cape Kennedy, Cape Canaveral. So they're developing all these inroads to influence America. And heaven forbid, an American trying to buy a school in China, you know what happened there? Nothing. And so I go by again, the quo prid quo, or reciprocity. If we cannot buy schools and have schools in China, then we should not allow them to do that here in America. So the Confucius Institutes is one example of a Trojan horse. Another example is the Chinese have pivoted from funding all the Confucius Institutes into funding universities indirectly. And the classic and the most recent in the news, of course, is the University of Pennsylvania, one of the elite Ivy League schools, receiving $50–60 million that we know of from China ever since they formed the Biden Center. In other words, the Penn Biden Center in Washington, D.C. was founded by the University of Pennsylvania for President, or then Vice President, or ex-Vice President Biden after he left the Obama administration. And he was paid over $1 million to teach, only he never taught. He made a few speeches, made $1 million. And now we're finding out he kept classified documents in his office. And the Chinese now had access through this Penn Center and through the University of Penn, through all this money, access to the elite leaders in America and the subversion and corruption of many of our leaders. We've seen some of our elected representatives in Congress subverted by Chinese female spies. It's an impressive effort. It's a total war against Western civilization in America. And the third Trojan horse is what they call the Belt and Road Initiative, where the Chinese come into a poor country, undeveloped country, and say, gee, you need a new stadium? We'll build it for you, give you nice terms, and we'll come in with all our workers, and we'll build that stadium for you, and you only owe us $100 million. But if you can't pay us back, we'll just take over the land. All your resources are mine. And what happened in
some cases, I think they're gifting those stadiums, right, to kind of get their foot in the door.
Yeah, well, sometimes they gift them, but most of the times it's debt. That over $1 trillion has been dispensed by the Chinese Communist Party throughout the world for these Belt and Road
as you
initiatives.
mentioned, the Sri Lanka, I'm not probably pronouncing this correctly, but the port there in Sri Lanka, and they are in very much big debt to China.
Right, and so China took over the port and the land around it. So, and there's an ongoing flap going on in one of the African countries where they can't pay off the Chinese. And of course, what they end up doing is they come to the West to bail them out for the Chinese. So in a way, we're subsidizing the Chinese program to take us down. So the three things are just indicative of Trojan horses. And then they do all sorts of other things with it, subverting through money our leaders and our institutions. Harvard, for example, has received $75 million from China. I mean, Harvard doesn't need money from China. I mean, they got, what, 50–60 billion in their trust. So all it is an influencing program so that the Chinese can say, well, we gave you $60 million and we want you to do this for us. One of my all-time favorite cartoons is The Wizard of Id. And the diminutive little president there, king there, said, he who has the gold makes the rules. And China has a lot of gold and they're making a lot of rules.
They are that. And like you said, definitely a debt trap with the Belt and Road Initiative. And we're going to dive into that a little bit more in your next SOS brief. But thank you very much for that brief. And to our listeners, follow us on Facebook. You can also listen to us and comment and subscribe on YouTube and Rumble. And to read in depth into Mr. Sanford's articles, please go to our website at www.ascf.us. Thank you.
Thanks, Joy.